Maya stepped into the classroom on her first day at Oak Ridge Academy, a prestigious private school known for its academic excellence but not for its diversity. She held her head high, her brown skin glowing in the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. She had heard the whispers as soon as she walked down the hall. People were not used to seeing students like her here. But she wasn't just any student. Maya was determined to prove that she belonged. As she took a seat in the front row, she noticed her teacher, Mrs. Thornhill, watching her with a cold, scrutinizing gaze. Mrs. Thornhill was an older woman, well respected among the staff, known for being strict. But Maya could feel something different, something sharper, like Mrs. Thornhill's eyes were cutting through her in a way they didn't with the other students. "Quiet down, class," Mrs. Thornhill called out, her voice stern. The chatter faded instantly. "We have a new student today," she said, glancing at Maya but quickly looking away, as if the sight of her was unpleasant. "Maya, James, is it?" Maya nodded, trying to smile despite the icy tone. "Yes, ma'am." "Well, you better keep up. I don't lower my standards for anyone," Mrs. Thornhill said, emphasizing the last word with a disdainful glare. The other students giggled nervously, sensing the tension but unsure of what to make of it. Maya felt a knot form in her stomach. She hadn't even opened her mouth yet and was already being treated like an outsider. Throughout the class, Mrs. Thornhill would single Maya out, asking her questions she knew were designed to trip her up. If Maya answered correctly, Mrs. Thornhill would barely acknowledge it, moving on quickly as if annoyed that she couldn't catch her off guard. But if Maya hesitated for even a second, Mrs. Thornhill's sharp words would slice through the silence. "Not quick enough, Maya," Mrs. Thornhill would say. "I expect more effort from you. Maybe this isn't the right place for someone like you." The other students began to notice, whispering among themselves. A few of them shot Maya sympathetic looks, but most remained silent, unsure of how to react. Maya's hands clenched under the desk, but she refused to let Mrs. Thornhill see her frustration. She wasn't going to let her get to her. As the weeks went on, the bullying became more blatant. Mrs. Thornhill would call Maya slow, unprepared, and once even suggested she wasn't cut out for a school like Oak Ridge. The remarks became sharper, more personal. It wasn't just about Maya's academic abilities anymore. It was about who she was. "People from your background don't usually excel here," Mrs. Thornhill said one day, after Maya had gotten an answer wrong during a math problem. "Maybe you should think about what kind of future is realistic for you." Maya's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the anger rising, but she kept her cool, her face an unreadable mask. The other students exchanged awkward glances. A few whispered among themselves, but no one dared speak up. Mrs. Thornhill ruled her classroom with an iron fist, and they knew better than to challenge her. One day, during an English lesson, things took a sharp turn. Mrs. Thornhill was discussing the concept of privilege and how different people had different opportunities in life. It was a sensitive topic, one that required care in how it was taught. But Mrs. Thornhill, with her veiled contempt, used it as an opportunity to push Maya even further. "We all know," she began, her eyes locking onto Maya's, "that some people are born into privilege while others, well, they have to struggle a little harder. Isn't that right, Maya?" Maya felt her face flush, but before she could respond, Mrs. Thornhill continued, "Some of us work hard to be here. Others just get lucky." The implication was clear, and Maya's fists clenched under the desk. But just as she was about to speak up, a voice interrupted her. "That's enough, Mrs. Thornhill." The entire class turned to see Principal James standing at the door, his face a mask of cold fury. He walked into the room, his eyes never leaving Mrs. Thornhill's. The air in the classroom grew tense as the students realized that something major was about to happen. Mrs. Thornhill's face drained of color. She had no idea that the girl she had been tormenting was the daughter of the principal. "Mr. James," she stammered, "I was just—" "You were just what?" Principal James interrupted, his voice low but laced with anger. "Bullying my daughter? Undermining her in front of her peers? Making her feel like she doesn't belong here?" The room was silent. The students watched in shock as their once untouchable teacher was suddenly vulnerable. Maya sat frozen in her seat, unsure of what to feel. "This school has a zero-tolerance policy for racism, Mrs. Thornhill," Principal James continued, stepping closer to her. "And what you've been doing to Maya is not just inappropriate, it's unacceptable." Mrs. Thornhill opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked at Maya, then back at Principal James, as if searching for a way out of the situation. But there was none. "I'll be speaking to the school board about this," Principal James said, his voice like ice. "You're done here." Mrs. Thornhill's face crumpled. She gathered her things, her hands shaking, and left the classroom without another word. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but the tension in the room remained. Principal James turned to Maya, his expression softening. "I'm sorry, Maya," he said quietly. "I didn't realize how bad it had gotten." Maya nodded, her emotions a mix of relief, anger, and sadness. She had stood strong through weeks of torment, and now it was over. But the damage had been done. The principal looked around the room, addressing the other students. "Oak Ridge is a place for everyone," he said firmly, "and I won't tolerate anyone, staff or students, who think otherwise." With that, he left the room, leaving Maya and her classmates in stunned silence. But as the door closed behind him, Maya's classmates began to react. A few students came over to her, offering apologies for not speaking up sooner. Others still looked uncomfortable, unsure of how to process what had just happened. But Maya didn't care about them. She had survived Mrs. Thornhill's cruelty, and now she knew that she wasn't alone. Her father had her back, and she was determined to make the most of her time at Oak Ridge. As she packed up her things at the end of the day, Maya felt a sense of pride. She had endured, and while the road ahead might still be difficult, she was ready for whatever came next. The next few weeks at Oak Ridge felt different. Without Mrs. Thornhill's oppressive presence, Maya felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The new teacher, Ms. Rivera, was warm, welcoming, and treated all the students with respect, including Maya. The shift in the classroom atmosphere was almost immediate. Students no longer whispered behind her back or avoided eye contact. Maya was finally able to focus on her work, her confidence growing with each passing day. One afternoon, after acing a difficult math test, Maya's classmates, who had once been silent bystanders to Mrs. Thornhill's bullying, began approaching her with genuine smiles. "Hey, Maya," one girl named Sarah said. "You're really smart. I'm sorry for not standing up for you before. It wasn't right." Maya appreciated the gesture, even though part of her still felt hurt by the silence. But she wasn't one to hold grudges. "Thanks, Sarah. It's okay." As word spread about what had happened, Maya found herself becoming a bit of a legend at school. Students admired her strength for standing up to a teacher who had been feared by so many. It wasn't just about Maya being the principal's daughter anymore. She had earned their respect on her own. One day, while she was leaving school, Maya noticed a group of younger black students watching her with wide eyes. They were new, just like she had been, and they had probably heard the story. She smiled at them and waved, silently letting them know that they too belonged here, no matter what anyone said. At home that evening, Maya's father sat down beside her. "You know, Maya, I'm proud of you. Not just for standing up to Mrs. Thornhill, but for showing everyone that you belong, on your own terms." Maya nodded, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. Oak Ridge wasn't an easy place, but she had earned her place here. And with her father by her side, she knew she could handle whatever challenges came her way. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more powerful and emotional tales like this, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Your support helps us share important messages and inspiring stories. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and join our community today.